Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Craig Dickinson.
And I'm Matt Leader. Today on the show, we'll be starting with Jaws.
Released on June 20th, 1975, Jaws is directed by Steven Spielberg, with a screenplay by Peter Benchley, who also wrote the book, and a gentleman by the name of Carl Gottlieb, who was a comedy writer and an actor. He actually has a part in the film, and he's most famous at this time for writing for the TV show The Odd Couple. And also, we want to mention that the Jaws features an Oscar-winning score by John Williams, one of his best.
The film was edited by Verna Fields, who won an Oscar for the film. She also worked on American Graffiti, earning an Oscar nomination for editing, and Sugarland Express.
And the cinematography was done by Bill Butler, who worked on The Godfather, The Conversation. He had received an Oscar nomination for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and he worked on 3 Rocky films, Rockies 2, 3, and 4, and many other films that you've seen and probably really enjoy. So we're going to go ahead and, speaking of Bill Butler and cinematography, talk about the cinematography of Jaws. And Matt, what are some things that you noticed about the cinematography of this film?
So the first thing that really jumped out of the film for me was that so many of the frames had a sort of depth to it. And so as I was watching the film, you could see like the main character would be on the right-hand side, kind of on the right third line of the screen. And then in the background, you'd have characters talking or doing something. There seemed to be this great depth, just with almost all the composition in the frame, where there was multiple things going on and multiple points that you could kind of be paying attention to, kind of different panes, where in the first layer you have the character talking, and in the background you see something else going on. And that was the first thing that really jumped out to me. Along with that, and I think kind of going with it, the camera movement was pretty extraordinary. And there were so many scenes where it started in one location, and then you have movement, either by the characters or by the camera, or a lot of times both. And then it would reframe with them doing something else. And so a lot of the takes it seemed a lot longer than some of the recent films we've been talking about. And I just it kind of felt refreshing to me, where it wasn't a needless cut. They didn't cut back and forth just because 2 characters were talking necessarily. But there were a lot of times when there were a lot of phone conversations early on in the film. And the way that Spielberg and his cinematographer handle that is by having the characters move around in the environment, and it gives a sort of 3D depth to the location. And this is something that, because we've just kind of finished wrapping up talking about Star Wars, this is one of the things I feel like the prequel movies struggled with, was having a 3-dimensional depth to the locations, where it felt like the characters were kind of on one plane of existence, and there were many things going on around them, but it didn't have that kind of natural depth that the original trilogy, and I think the sequel trilogy, do a much better job of.
Yeah, speaking of that, there's one scene in particular that you talk about the camera not moving a whole lot with conversations. When Mrs. Kittner is confronting Brody after they catch the shark that they think ate him, the camera just lingers. It's a close-up on Mrs. Kittner the entire conversation. And it's a one-sided conversation, where she's just berating him, and she's blaming him, and right before she slaps him and all that stuff. And she's at the center, the camera's over his left shoulder, and they do not do a shot counter shot, which we're so used to seeing. Like, let's show his reaction. Let's show him getting ready to say something. But it doesn't do that at all, which I found fascinating, that it's just very long, lingering shot on her. And then even after she finishes, it pulls away to a wide shot of Brody, and he's standing there with the mayor, and Hooper's there as well. But at no point do you get a close-up of his reaction. So it's just some really interesting choices that I saw with that. I also felt like in some ways the film was kind of claustrophobic in the fact that there's very little sky. The way the camera is set up is that it's very low. And I think probably to to emphasize the water aspect of it. A lot of the shots, like on the water, you see quite a bit of water below, and very little sky. But even when people are walking around town, I'm used to seeing much larger glimpses of the sky. But most of the time, it's walking around with like mid shots of the characters. But it doesn't. The camera's really set low. Sometimes the camera's actually in the water, which gives you that kind of immersive feeling. I think it did an excellent job of making you kind of feel that paranoia and the fact that, Brody, for the most part, is trapped in this situation. That's kind of what I got from that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think two other things that really stood out to me. There's one shot, and I know you'll know what I'm talking about, when Brody's sitting on the beach, and it's roughly 30 to 40% of the way through the film, and he's kind of resigned himself to, they're not going to close the beach, they're not really going to listen to me, I got to kind of make do. And when the people realize that there's a shark in the water, and they have that camera effect with the lenses and the dolly zoom, yep. And it's an amazing shot, and it gets done quite a bit in other films for that kind of shock and awe. But I think Spielberg does it really well. That sense of kind of wonder and amazement. In this case, it's a negative connotation, but it's this kind of shock and awe that Brody is in, and the camera totally sells it. And it's probably the most, if you say what's the most famous shot from Jaws, it's probably that one shot. We're talking about cinematography. So I absolutely love that. And the other one is when the mayor is trying to convince Brody that the initial shark attack was a boat accident, and they get on the little ferry. And the whole thing, I'm pretty sure, is just one shot. And I want to say it's a couple minutes long. I think it's one of the longest, if not the longest shot in the whole film. And again, it's this example of the camera moving with the characters, and the characters moving and reframing each other as the conversation continues, because there's kind of like an initial resistance that Brody has. And then as he kind of softens and he's talking to the other characters, he kind of gradually cedes ground to them. And the camera gets kind of pulls closer and closer to Brody and the mayor, until finally the mayor kind of pulls them in, and the final framing is those two huddled close together, and the mayor's kind of like, look, you're going to do what I tell you. And I think that right there is just, it's a style that is, I would say, I don't see as much anymore. And I think a lot of films, at least a lot of films that I watch, have a very edit happy kind of style. Not that it's bad, but it was just fun to watch a film that kind of went in the opposite direction. And if you didn't need to cut, they wouldn't cut.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because we think that great editing means I've spliced a lot of shots together, but sometimes it's the knowing just to leave it that makes it great editing. And I think that Jaws is a great job with building tension with those long shots and choosing very specific shots. I'm really glad you brought up the dolly zoom shot too, because I had that too. I'm like, this is like the greatest thing ever. It so brings you in. But my other favorite shot in the film is, and we'll get to it with dialogue, is when Brody is chumming the water and Jaws pops up. And it's a close up on Brody's face, and then Jaws, I call him Jaws, I don't know if that's his name, but the shark, right, pops up in the left corner. And what's great is, I think even better on a second watch or later watches, is they duplicate that. That's actually the second time we've seen that shot. We've seen it another time, and every time I watch him, like, is this the time where he pops up? And it does this a bunch of times where shots where it's like a red herring. You know what I'm saying? Where this shot where like something bad is going to happen, and then it doesn't. So then the next time it happens, you're kind of relaxed, and then something horrible happens, and it that has that great jump scare. It does such a great job building tension just through those types of shots. And when it's close up like that, you can't see everything, and so you get to see what the filmmakers want you to see, and it's very little at those times.
It's almost a horror movie trope.
Yeah.
where you have it's like a fake out where the tension is up and you're expecting something, doesn't happen. Maybe it doesn't happen a second time, and then the third time it does.
Right. The last thing that I wanted to talk about with cinematography was the color, because I did some research on this and saw that Spielberg had asked that there not be any red in the film other than blood. And the only instance you get of that is there's the lifeguards have like the red jackets, but that's it. Other than that, there's no red clothing. There's not like a red bicycle or anything that stands out. But there's a lot of yellow to kind of replace that. And yellow, from color theory is like happiness, optimism. And, one of the most glaring examples of this is Alex Kittner's little raft that he goes out on his little inflatable mattress, takes it out there. And then, of course, Jaws does his thing with him. And then what comes back is this deflated yellow mattress covered in red blood. And it's this contrast of happy optimism and no, it's actually horror. You should have been paying more attention to what's going on. And you even have like the mayor's sports coat is a yellow coat after Alex Kittner dies. And so you have this, we're going to say it's one thing, but it's clearly not underneath the surface, this contrast between those two colors.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the movie works so well on a story level is because you can relate to kind of being that person who's in the middle of things. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the COVID situation and authorities maybe having some mixed messaging and wanting things to appear better than they maybe are to not cause a panic and to make sure people are doing, good business and things like this, and it just seems real, that
verisimilitude.
Yeah. That feeling of this feels true to life and kind of putting a happy face on a kind of terrible situation.
Hey, I had that same thought. That was one of one of my final thoughts was, is one of the themes of this film that, commerce is more important than safety, because that's very much the mayor. And it's not, clearly he's set up as a fool. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to sympathize with him, but I think it's, the dangers of choosing, anything other than safety. Like safety should be your first priority, and it's not for that guy. And
I think that you're not really supposed to sympathize with him, but it does make sense, like from his perspective. Mm-hmm. Now his priorities are misplaced, but his job is to make sure that the town thrives, and without, as he says, summer dollars, Amity's a summer town. They won't survive if they don't have, and even Quint brings it up. When he makes the first offer to hunt the shark, it's like, if you don't hire me, then you're going to starve in the winter. And so, I think there is a real fear there. And I think that's also what makes me appreciate the film is that it's not a villain who's just evil for the sake of being evil. He has a motive. Now it's wrong, but it's still there.
So let's go ahead and transition into sound. And I had the first thing that I liked was the muffled by water sound effects. That there was a lot of that. I mentioned earlier that the camera is in the water a lot to kind of give you that immersive experience where it'll splash up against it, where you almost feel in some of the scenes, like I'm thinking of like all the people off the beach, they're out swimming. You almost feel like you're in there. The water can get in your eye, and you're going to go underwater a little bit, and you kind of have that muffled kind of paranoia. Again, that very immersive experience. Between that and then Quint's fingernails on the chalkboard, man, that's just such a great reveal of this character and an introduction for him that he just doesn't give a crap. And I'm going to get your attention however obnoxiously it is.
Yeah, and I feel like the sound effect and the music are both used as transitional elements from a sense of safety to a sense of danger most of the time in the film. You have Williams' iconic score, and that is meant to increase the tension of the film, in an audible way before really anything has happened to any of the characters. But the chalk scratch is kind of a transition where the focus turns to Quint. There's a moment on the beach when they have the whistles, and the whistles go off and everyone panics. There's obviously the screams and the splashing by the victims who get attacked. So I noticed that a lot of times that they used music or sound cues to transition from kind of one sphere of either attention or safety into another sphere of attention or danger.
Yeah, and we know we talked in an earlier episode about uh, the special effects and in this case the lack thereof, that you can't really show the shark, and we know it was a notoriously difficult production and that the shark didn't work for most of the film, and so but it works for the benefit of the film, right? The fact that you can't see it is actually scarier, and so you do have the theme, just two notes. I mean, how genius is it? That's just two notes that stands in. You hear that and you know the shark is there. And as much as we talked about leitmotif kind of signifying kind of that you should be thinking about this character or this theme with Jaws, those two notes absolutely mean the shark is there and somebody's going to be in big trouble for that. The scene I love that uses that masterfully is when you have the two boys with a fake fin going through and people are saying shark, shark, but there's no music. And if you're paying attention, you're thinking, okay, well, that's a little weird. Maybe that's, and then of course there's the big fake out, and that's total red herring. And I love that scene so much because it's like everybody calms down, and then the music kicks in, and it's like now it's on. Now he's in the pond. People are going to die, and that's just it's so great. The music is so effective, and it's almost almost to its detriment that we think, well, it's just two notes and it's just that one song. And so, how could the music really be that good with this film? But it's used so masterfully, and it's not just the two notes that it uses. There's also when Hooper finds Ben Gardner's head, like there's almost like a little psycho riff, just to kind of, because it is like it's a horror film that we're in. What kind of film is this? Now it's a horror film, and then I really love the when July 4th happens and there's like all this like kind of happy upbeat music after people have already been dying, and there's like this dramatic irony of like all these people are just lining up for like a buffet, and we're supposed to look at that and go, you guys, what are you doing? But they're all happy and ignorant.
Another moment that caught my ears was when early in the film, I believe it's the mayor and Brody are having one of the very first conversations about the attack, and they're walking, or maybe it's not the mayor, maybe it's his deputy, but they run into like a parade and you've got like the drummers and everything going on, and the music almost drowns the conversation out. But to me, that was just saying like the pageantry of the weekend was overriding the worry and the concerns of Brody. And so that was just like a little moment of kind of cinematic language storytelling that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it almost works like a silent film, right? Mm-hmm. It's that same kind of thing where that music can manipulate you. I also like the use, you mentioned the band music. So the diegetic music in this movie is sparse, but I think it's great. I love that there's people whistling, again, oblivious to what's happening. Quint is, I think, characterized beautifully by his song. That's like his way out of, his farewell and adieu is kind of his way out of every awkward moment that he's in, or he just likes to make it more awkward. And then it's used it's used as instrumental music later after he overworks the boat, just kind of like, yeah, you didn't take things seriously enough, and now you're going to pay for that. And I always just love the show me the way to go home part, where they're singing and they're having a great old time. And again, it's kind of like that fake out with the July 4th music, where it's like, as soon as you let your guard down and you're like having a good old time with the singing, well, you shouldn't have been paying attention, but you weren't. And now here it comes.
As far as performances, I thought the performances were largely fantastic, but I think the person who really steals the show for me is Quint. And I see you nodding.
I love Quint.
Yeah, and there's a couple moments, but I think the one that really grabs me is the story of the Indianapolis. Is that right?
Yes.
When he's kind of going on, they're showing off their scars, and it's a great camaraderie moment. And so I love that as like character work, where these three people who have, and I'll come back to this later, but they have tensions between all three of them, but they kind of find their common ground. And it's this, bonding moment between these three men out on the sea on this hunt. and it kind of devolves into just the camera lingering on Quint. And you mentioned earlier about not cutting away. It does cut away a few times, but for the most part, it lingers on Quint. And it's almost spellbinding, the way, the gravitas that he has telling that story. And I think that is fantastic acting, when you can kind of spin that story in those lines and you can just have the camera be still and just linger on you, and that's all you have and you're entertained. That's fantastic. I mean, you talk about performance, that's amazing to me.
Yeah, this is definitely a thing that I've noticed the more times I watch it and the older I get, is just how clearly drawn these three characters are. When you're little and you see the film, it's three guys out on a boat. But now it's, and it's maybe Quint. You might recognize the fact that Quint is a little off, because he is, So Quint is Quint. We talked about him, but Brody, he being afraid of water. What a great character note, and he's out there because it's his duty more than it is anything else. Hooper is, he's curious. I think he's more about the science, and I think I find it fascinating that he's very, very smart, and he has a whip smart sense of humor. He uses gallows humor a lot, but he's got a very weak stomach. I found that fascinating too. He does it a couple of times. With the first time that he sees Kittner's body, and you can see him starting to freak out a little bit, and like, let me have some water, and he starts talking kind of fast, and I love his line. He says, "It's not a boat accident. It wasn't any propeller. It wasn't any coral reef, and it wasn't Jack the Ripper. It was a shark." I mean, that, like, how beautifully to kind of sum up where the movie's at this point. Like, he's freaking out, and again, gallows humor. It's not Jack the Ripper. It's not a joke. This is what's happening. This is real for him. And he's an expert, and we should listen to him. Of course, my favorite line in the film is, "You're going to need a bigger boat."
Yeah.
And I think that's everyone's favorite line. And knowing, of course, that this is not a real shark, how great of a performance is it? Seriously, how great of a performance is it from Roy Scheider to just stand back and he's so quick in his movement, and then to back up and to just be like, this is all I can get out of me right now is this, and we're in trouble. And you just believe it. And I think that's just the primary thing, as much as little as we see the shark, that these guys sell it so well that they're in mortal danger, and that they have a serious job to do.
Yeah. And before I forget, there's a line from Brody, because you mentioned that he's afraid of the water. And I believe it's Hooper who says, like, it's kind of crazy that, you're afraid of the water, but you live on an island. And he basically says, it's only an island if you look at it from the water.
Yeah.
And I just love the kind of oxymoron in it, but like it makes sense. I just think that's a brilliant line. But yeah, I think it's also really fun that you take the main character, and a very simple story writing technique is to throw a character into their personal hell. And for someone who's afraid of the water, what would be worse than being forced to go out on a small fishing boat with an insane captain and a very preoccupied scientist, and I don't know if it says he can't swim, but he's certainly afraid of the water, and he's very, very nervous, and he doesn't know anything about boats. But then there's this tension between the two people who do know about boats, of this kind of new school versus old school. They are both very egotistical men. Hooper, with his scientific and advanced knowledge in the sonar and all, the closed caption cameras and everything, and you have Quint, who's this kind of old-fashioned New England fisherman. And so, even something that they should be kind of agreeing on, or on the same wavelength on, there's a tension there. And then there's a tension between those two and Brody, because he can't do anything right on the boat. And so there's this kind of wonderful tension between the three characters and the boat itself and the water and the shark. And so every character and Jaws has this element of tension with each other. And I think that makes for some really fantastic storytelling, because there's a lot to work with there.
Yeah, I'm not going to add to that because but why? Just leave that. That's awesome. So setting and design. filmed on location because it's the 70s, right? So they're filmed in Martha's Vineyard on an island, and it's an island regardless of where you look at it. And it's in the ocean. Almost all of it is actually shot on the ocean, which is ridiculously hard to do, as Spielberg found out pretty quickly, and a lot of filmmakers have found out. I mean, that's why Titanic cost as much money as it did, or one of the reasons. Except for a couple of scenes, and I think it's pretty easy to figure out which scenes are in swimming pools or tanks, like when Hooper's in the shark cage, for instance. You couldn't do that in the ocean, and same thing with finding the head and the shark tooth. But for the most part, I mean, adds to the realism again that you have. It's the movie's about three guys on a boat in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the ocean, and it's really three guys and camera crew, whatever, in the middle of the ocean.
I just love that it's in some ways it's two different movies a little bit, because you mentioned that line earlier about Hooper saying that it's not Jack the Ripper, but in my mind when I heard that I was like, but it kind of is, because this is very much like a creature feature. Like this is very much like a horror movie where the shark is a slasher. Like, it has a like a knowledge. Its sentience is clearly there. It's more than just a shark. And so like kind of the first half is this shark prowling the waters, searching for victims, and then it kind of transitions into this adventure film where the three guys go off and sail off on this adventure to go hunt the shark and save the town. And I just kind of enjoy those two parts of it because it just lends to two different vibes on the movie.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I enjoyed the beginning of the movie just fine because it's done so well, and I love the rapport between all the characters. Even watching Brody kind of fight with the mayor, but then as soon as they all three go out there, it's like, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen, and now I get to just sit back and enjoy these three guys just playing off of each other. And the thing with the barrels. I mean, that's my big thing with props. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out what kind of props you want to look at, but the barrels are basically a stand-in for the shark. You see those again, yellow, right? Back to that yellow color again. It's supposed to be happy, but it's like you see those and that's not good. And it's amazing that they're just like dragging some barrels along the surface of the water, and we're like, oh crap, there's a shark. It's so effective. And I love the foreshadowing with the air tanks. It's at least two times where they almost collide or go off, and Brody is very he's reprimanded. Maybe be careful of those. It's very much the Chekhov's gun thing, right? These are explosive. Hey, guess what? These things are explosive. And then you get to the end and they're like, hey, maybe you should explode those air tanks. And of course they do. But just brilliant use of some very specific props.
I got to say, I think the shark is most effective when you don't really see him. I do think the prop itself doesn't quite hold up as well. It's still entertaining. And I still love it, but I think it's a case of less is more for it. When you just see the fin, I think it's a little scarier, and I think it works a little bit more effectively. But yeah, I think because I thought about that too when I saw the barrels. Like it's pretty extraordinary that you can create tension with three floating barrels, like coming towards a ship, but it works really well. I do think that they set up the oxygen tanks at least twice. They are in a couple more shots, I think. They're not directly mentioned, but they're there. And so that is really great prop work. I also think that there's a couple shots on the boat where you see there's one shot that always stands out to me when Brody is walking along the edge and his boot kind of slips off. And you just realize that there's this it's almost like they're on the edge of a knife when they're walking along this ship, especially Brody, where it's like there's not really much margin for error. Like this is a tiny little ship. When the fire starts and everything starts kind of going bad and the ship is starting to die and smoke and everything, That's kind of, to me, the ramp up in the tension, because things are coming to a climax. As the ship begins to die, the characters are in more and more danger, and they're kind of running out of options. There's only so much more that they can do.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention a little bit with set decoration, how we see things, shots lingering on items in the boat downstairs, jumping up and down as the shark rams them, which reminded me a lot of the water in Jurassic Park.
Mm.
And I really feel like he cribbed from himself a little bit when he does Jurassic Park. That it's the less is more. Like we never see the raptors until the end. It's a lot of it is reaction of the actors to portray like what kind of danger and how fearsome these creatures are. But when I saw that, I was like, that's a great. And again, we don't see the shark in that scene at all, right? All we see is like the wood being cracked. We see the things inside the boat jumping up and down. We see the terror on the actors' faces. But again, we don't see the shark. But we don't need to. It's way scary to be thinking what he's doing. Yeah, because really, we talked about like when the shark works and when it doesn't. I think obviously that you're going to need a bigger boat scene works because it's out of focus too, and that's another brilliant thing, right? The focus is so tight on Brody's face that when the shark pops up, you only get a glimpse of it. And then I think in the shark cage, that one works for me. When Hooper's in the cage and it just keeps ramming at him, and it's just teeth just jump, and you see the close up on Hooper's eyes repeatedly. And you're like, yeah, I feel you. I'm with you. I'm in there with you.
I also think that it speaks to the fact that a lot of times something that's scary is a lot scarier before it happens or before it comes. But like the precursor is worse. Like worrying about what's going to happen is almost worse than the thing itself. Because once the thing is there, you can spring into action. But it's the not knowing that really tortures the person. And that's, I think, what Spielberg does in this and in Jurassic Park really well. Because you don't know exactly when it's coming, where it's coming from, what's going to happen next. You know, that moment when the shark finally jumps up onto the back of the boat and is eating Quint. It's like, it's right there in front of you. You know it's not going to come up and sneak up on you from behind. But when you said, when Hooper's in the water, there's a shot where it's the dark, murky water, and you can't quite see where the shark is. And to me, that's the greatest point of tension. That's the greatest point of fear, when you don't quite know where it's going to come from. Once it's there, yes, it's scary, but it's not quite as bad as not knowing where it is.
Yeah, I mean, you even get a little bit from Quint's dialogue with him, being this, awesome shark hunter who's done it all and seen it all, that you can see him puzzled, and he even makes comments about, I think he's under the boat. It's like if he's worried and he can't see it and he's worried about not seeing it, then I should also be worried that I can't see it. And that just continually, builds the tension. So with characters, is there anything we haven't talked about yet?
Not really. I think that's kind of something that we've kind of talked about the whole way through.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, there's a small cast in this film, which again works to its advantage, that you get to know these characters really, really well and care about them a lot. You're rooting for all of these guys, even Quint. I mean, he does some really strange things. I was puzzled for a very long time when I was younger about why he destroys the radio, and looking back at it now, then there's actually two things with the radio. I mean, kind of going back to props wrap a second, where he calls in, it's like, yep, no, we still haven't found him. It's like, he's right there. And it's clearly he's going to take this on himself. He's full on Captain Ahab here.
Yeah.
That he doesn't want any help. And it doesn't matter like what kind of danger's in it. It doesn't matter what happens to him. He's just going to face this no matter whatever happens. And then, he gets eaten, which is a brilliantly shot. I think you get the camera work there too, just back and forth, and you see him sliding in. Such a great moment, man. I'm just thinking about that. Like, you feel nervous and you feel tense, like watching him slide slowly down and doesn't linger on the back and forth in the shark's face and his face. So
I think for me, kind of, a last final thought is, I just think it's really fun to have a main character who is afraid and has such like an obvious character flaw. and that's kind of an internal conflict that he has to come over. And you can, obviously see that by the end. He utters a line, something like, "And I used to be afraid of the water," or something like that, just kind of signifying that like he's kind of finally conquered his fear. And I just think that's like a really cool last little bit.
Yeah, the last line, I wrote this down. The last line of the film is Brody says, "I hate the water." And Hooper says, "Can't imagine why."
Yeah. So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you would like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, or you can email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com.
And if you haven't yet, please join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.